So I was, when I first got David Spangler to come and be a presenter at the Fairy Congress, I was just overjoyed because David is a rock star in the fairy realm. I don't know if there's humans that have reputations in the fairy realm, David Spangler will be one of them. And I heard this story once, and it comes from Findhorn. And David Spangler was director at Findhorn for 1970 to 1973. And so the story, it comes from Dorothy McLean, who was communicating with the David spirits and the fairies. And the fairies, at one day, they were just all excited and just super excited and just talking up a storm. And she says, "What's going on? What's so exciting?" And they said, "The man of the trees is coming. The man of the trees is coming. Richard St. Barbe Baker. He's famous in the fairy realm because he's been helping the forest of the world and the trees of the world. He was called the man of the trees." So humans can have reputations in the fairy realm. And David Spangler, I'm sure, has one. He was, as I mentioned, part of the Findhorn for a while. He's written well over 50 books on the subtle realms, and he'll probably tell you some of this in his talk here. But David started hearing and seeing these spirit beings since he was a little child, and he's carried that with him through his whole life. So 70 years of experience working in the subtle realms. And he's written many books. One of them is called The Explorer's Guide to the Subtle Realms, or a field notes of an explorer in the subtle realm. So at any rate, David knows his way around the subtle realms quite a bit, but he's very unassuming and humble. You know, some people, they get famous in the fairy realm, it goes to their head and they get all big-headed. But not David Spangler. He is just one of the sweetest people I know. So he's sweet, he's soft-spoken, and he really knows his way around the fairy realm. So now what we need to do is get his presentation up here, and Brendan's coming in to put that up. And it's a good thing I don't have to learn all this technology, because we'd really be in the dark ages. Okay. And so David's got about a hour and a little bit over an hour talk here. And I just talked to him on the phone. He's planning on being with us for the question and answers. So at that time, we can probably take some questions. But if you use the chat box here, if you have questions that you want answered, put them in the chat box as we go along, and it's more likely that I'll be able to, I'll be watching those questions and have some of them lined up for him. So do use the chat box. I'm going to get on there shortly. Of course, you can find his website. He's with the Lorien Foundation. So that's where you'd find most of his works and his books and how to go to. He has he has online offerings. So like so many people, he's now teaching online.
Okay, let me know when you want to.
Okay, here we go.
Can everybody hear that?
Can people hear that?
Hello, everybody.
Yes.
I want to join with the other presenters in welcoming you to the Fairy Congress. What a wonderful event, and what a wonderful opportunity for us to reach out and connect with each other through the miracle of modern telecommunications.
I need to be able to see that.
And also to reach out in our heart and mind and spirit to our colleagues and companions, our friends and allies in the realms of the she and of the fairy. To know that there's a group of us, human beings, who are aware of these other dimensions and the lives that live upon them. and who seek to reach out in friendship and love and partnership on behalf of the healing and wholeness of our world, is a joyous thing. And what a wonderful way to start this new year, 2021. My name is David Spangler, and I'm speaking to you from the downstairs family room of our house. And I would like to begin by taking a moment to use this particular artifact and to invoke and welcome the presence of my she colleagues. This is a fairy portal or a she portal, and those of you who are familiar with John Matthews' book on the she will recognize this glyph. It's the symbol that was given to him by his own she contacts to use as a focal point for meditation. This particular portal, which is desk size, was made by a dear friend and colleague of mine, Mr. Ron Hayes. And some of you may be familiar with his work and with his wonderful website on the she. So what we're going to do is take a moment to be aware of our individual aspirations or thoughts or heart songs reaching out toward the she and the realms of fairy, and to invite our colleagues and partners from those realms to join us. And you'll notice at the moment the glyph portal is closed. But now as we begin our event and my talk, I'm going to open it. And in this opening, I invite my colleagues from the realms of the she to take part in this event together and to add their wisdom and their presence to my presentation and to the field of energy and light and love that we are all building together. So with this open, I'm going to put this back up here on the shelf, tilt it just a little bit so you can see the symbol being open, and we'll begin. What I want to talk with you about today is the concept of Anwa and its relationship to the phenomenon of shape-shifting. Obviously, there's a great deal of lore and legendary around the idea of shape-shifting. And we are informed that members of the fairy race and of the she have the ability to take on new forms, to appear in one way and then, either by will or whim, to appear in a different shape, a different form altogether. Certainly in my experience, my subtle colleagues, the beings who are not in incarnation, who are not part of the physical or etheric worlds, in the same way that the she and the fairy realms are. That subtle beings, definitely, can take on a variety of shapes, often influenced by what they find in our own imaginations. And they do so, in most cases, to facilitate communication with us, to appear in a way that will seem familiar. Certainly, many years ago, 1965, my own first mentor, subtle mentor and colleague, a being whom I named John, appeared to me in the form of a college professor in his late 30s or early 40s, with an open neck collar and a tweed jacket with leather patches on the elbows. And since I was only about 2 or 3 weeks out of the university, having left the university, this was a familiar and comforting image to me. But as our relationship developed, John said, I'm going to take my normal form, and he let go of this construct, the Tweedy professor construct, as I used to call it, and he appeared in his rightful shape or form, which really was hardly anything we would call a form at all, as a field of light. So I'm familiar with this phenomenon of shape-shifting in the subtle realms, but dealing with the she and with the realms of fairy, that's a different experience for me. A number of years ago, I was upstairs, almost directly above where I'm sitting now, sitting on the sofa in our living room. And suddenly, a being appeared, came into my field of awareness, a being carrying energy and light unlike anything I had experienced up to that time. And it was disconcerting because it was very, not only powerful, but different and strange. And my own energy field, my own aura, hadn't learned how to accommodate it and how to integrate with it. But the being who was emanating this field was a very lovely and benign presence, and a feminine presence. And she introduced herself, giving me her name, which I could never pronounce, I could never really render in language. And so I said, I'm going to call you Mariel. And she agreed and said that was fine. In some ways, it came close to the name that she gave to me, which was really like more like experiencing crystalline, clear water flowing in a mountain stream with starlight above reflecting in the water. So for me, that became Mariel. And Mariel was, and still remains, for the most part to this day, my primary contact within the realm of the she. And Mariel came with a request and a mission, asking if I and my Lorien colleague Jeremy Berg, whom you will be hearing from as well in this Fairy Congress, would put together and publish a card deck that could be used as a point of contact with the she. Actually, a kind of visual, dynamic set of cards that would function much like this portal in the background here. And that was the beginning of the development and eventual publication by Lorien Press of the card deck of the she. And that began several years of intermittent communication. Months can go by without my having any contact with Mariel or with her particular group. And then suddenly there will be a great deal of contact and a lot of information. So one day when I was in contact with Mariel, one of those moments when there was a lot of connection and information flowing back and forth, I asked her about this phenomenon of shape-shifting. And I want to read to you what she had to say. She said, "The true shape of anything isn't what it looks like, but what it is as an activity of life. You do not have a word for this. It is something's function, yes, but also how life moves and flows within and around it. It is the intentionality that powers that movement. You might use a word like spirit, but it is not truly the spirit of something. Rather, it is the pattern that the spirit imparts. We call this the Anwa, and that word is spelled A-N-W-A, Anwa." And Mariel continues, "If we see a tree, we are aware of the spirit of the tree and also of its form, its trunk and branches, how its roots go into the earth, the shape of its leaves, and so forth. The Anwa stands between these two things. It is the shape of the tree's spirit's intent and the activity and functions that flow from that intent. It took me a little while to fully grasp what Mariel meant by Anwa, partly because in my own work I deal so much with the spirit within things and with the subtle energy and the subtle presence that of life that is within all things. And so I kept going back to that default position. And then Mariel would gently lead my mind back and say, no, that's not what it is. She did say, Anwa is not the same as spirit or soul, though they are related. Anwa emerges from the intent of a soul or a spirit, its will to be a certain thing in a certain way. So it reflects the innate identity of that soul and spirit. But it is the motion of that intent and identity as it encounters the whole environment in which it is manifesting. Anwa is like the pattern of a dance, and in a dance there are always partners. Anwa emerges out of connection and collaboration and reflects the movement that partners create in their dancing. I want to pause here and explain something about the nature of these communications. And this is true whether I'm in communication with one of the she or with one of my non-physical, subtle colleagues. And I distinguish between the two because the she are physical beings. They are in incarnation the same as you and I. It's just that the physical matter that makes up their body and their world is at a different frequency from ours, but it's still part of the incarnate earth. It's not a spiritual realm. It's not a subtle realm that's beyond the physical. But these subtle realms do exist, and both the she and we can have relationship with beings who do not share physical incarnation, whether it's she physical or human physical. When I communicate with such beings, with my subtle colleagues, and with Mariel and her colleagues, it's a combination of techniques, I guess you'd say, modalities. Sometimes it's verbal, it's language, it's telepathic. Words appear in my mind. And then it's not unlike having a conversation with another physical human being. But much of the time, it's something else. It's something that involves my whole body, my whole energy field, as if I become like a tuning fork that vibrates, or even better, like a harp, the strings of which vibrate when touched and plucked. And that vibration, that movement, that inner activity of sensation and energy and consciousness creates meaning. That meaning can take the form of imagery, often does, or eventually I can translate it into words, in which case the words are my own. Although, like any good translator, I try to be as true to the intent of the original source as I can be. So that's what's happening here. Mariel is only partly communicating telepathically. She's also communicating in a kind of vibratory emanation, a blending of her energy field and my own. It took a while for this to develop because her energy is very different from anything that I had experienced before, as I said. Now, after many years, it's familiar to me, and it's relatively easy for me to converse in this way, energetically, holistically, with Mariel or one of her she colleagues. But initially it was difficult. But when it is working, it's very clear to me what is being conveyed. And then I need to find the language with which I can translate it and share it with others like yourself, or people, or to write it for my classes or for my books. So Mariel was trying to get across to me, not verbally, not intellectually, this idea of Anwa. And to do so, I had to experience it. She had to induce. She had to induct the experience of the Anwa within me. And this did not come immediately. I had to work at it, but the work was not intellectual, not trying to understand with my mind. It was trying to feel it in my body, feel it in the wholeness of my being. So when Mariel speaks of motion and patterns and dance, both she and I are trying to arrive at metaphors that will embrace this sense of a very dynamic relationship, that Anwa comes out of and manifests a relationship. She goes on to say, when we see a tree, for instance, its Anwa is not just the identity and pattern of the tree as an individual expression of its species. It is also the relationship it is forming with the soil, with the air around it, with other plants in its vicinity, with the animals that may feed on its fruits, and with the birds that nest in its branches. Anwa reflects the potentials that these characteristics and relationships make possible. In other words, Anwa is an ecological concept. It's almost a way of talking about how a particular organism fits energetically into a given environment, how it relates, and how it relates from the depth of its being, from its essential incarnating spirit or soul, that which makes it who and what it is. From where I'm sitting, I look across the room, and there are French doors, transparent French doors leading into the backyard of my home. And I see a maple tree that has been a friend and colleague to myself and to my family for the over 30 years that we've lived in this house. And this maple tree has its own unique spirit. It's not like any other maple tree. It has an individuality, an individual presence, the same as any other tree. In fact, there's a couple of maple trees in our backyard, but this is the one that is close to the house. When my kids were growing up, we had a tree house in it, and it's very much loved. And over the years, I've received wisdom and blessing from the spirit of this tree. But it's Anwa, it's not just that unique spirit. It's rather how that unique spirit dances with and expresses itself within the whole community of life, physical and non-physical, that surrounds it. So in a sense, Anwa carries the seeds, the potentials for what can unfold and what will manifest because of the ecosystem, because of the community of potential relationships in which the individual exists. Mariel can certainly sense my struggle to understand, to grasp Anwa, and not simply slot it into a mental category of, oh yeah, that's familiar to me, that's the soul, or that's the spirit, or whatever. And so she says, let me give you an example. Let us say you have a source of water, and from this source, water is going to flow down into the land. As you study the land, you can see the route the water is likely to take based on how the land is formed. The Anwa of the water is both its source, the wellspring from which the water is gushing forth, and the channels that will most likely define its pattern of flow. Imagine now the water flowing into the land. It flows into the channels that represent the paths of least resistance for it. But as it flows, it alters those channels and may create new ones that were unanticipated. After all, water is a powerful force, and when we see water rushing through landscape, we can see how it alters the land, even when it seeks out those topographical channels that will be most amenable to its flow, provide the least obstacle. Even though it does that, it still changes what it flows over. And of course, we know over long periods of time, those changes can be very dramatic. Just look at the Grand Canyon as an example. So Mariel says, Anwa is not only shaped by the influence of the environment, but also by the influence it can bring to bear upon the environment, which thereby changes it. When we see the Anwa of something, we see this potential. In other words, Anwa isn't just what's there in the moment. It's what could be there in future moments. It's what is there to emerge. But that emergence is not something, what's the word that I want, that only comes from that source. The emergence is collaborative with the environment and with the community of life in which that emergence takes place. Actually, this is not so different from the Buddhist teaching of codependent origination, that we are all co-creative with each other, and we help to bring each other into being. And to some extent, we all shape who we each become. Mariel goes on to say, Anwa is not seen in the same way you might see the energy field around a being. It is not an aura. She's commenting on the fact that, again, I'm searching in my mind for comparisons and for metaphors and analogies. I'm looking for what I know in my past experience and what might be familiar, and I'm trying to bring these concepts together. And part of me is going, oh, okay, Anwa's, yeah, that's, it's like the aura around something. And Mariel's saying, no, that's not it. You can't see it clairvoyantly. It's not a visual perception. It's a whole being perception, as it were. You think about Anwa, she says to me, and you try to find words to express and define it. I understand why you do this, especially if you are to share this concept with others, just as I'm doing with you right now. But this is not how we experience Anwa. I do not think into it. I do not think about it. I feel into it as an extension of my body. You could say, I see it with my heart. No, with my whole being. You have had the experience of listening to music and feeling your body respond as it begins to move in rhythm with that music. So think about this for a moment. I mean, Mariel was calling upon a familiar memory for me. I'm partly deaf, but I love to listen to music. I don't always get all the same nuances that I'm sure a person who had full hearing might hear. My wife, Julie, who has a wonderful ear, and who is musically talented, when she listens to music, she'll hear things that I don't, certain notes and pitches and frequencies that are outside my range. But I love to listen to music because I can feel it. This is not an uncommon experience for any of us. We feel it in ourselves. We are moved by the rhythm, by the sound, by the whole arrangement and beauty of what we're listening to. And so that's an experience of a full body awareness. And I can pick a song apart, I can try to understand it, listen to the words, analyze its composition, its musical structure, how the notes work together, and so on and so forth. But that's a very different understanding than this full body engagement in which I become one with the song. And it's that sense of being one with something, sharing its unique beingness that Mariel is seeking to communicate. So she said, you have had the experience of listening to music and feeling your body respond as it begins to move in rhythm with it. Then you know there is no thought involved in this. The music touches your body's own rhythm, and you begin to move accordingly without thinking about it. When I feel the Anwa of another, I share their movement. She could have said, I share their music. Well, or I could have translated what she did say in that way. I automatically move in rhythm with it as my own Anwa responds. It's why I speak of Anwa in terms of dance and music. And it's why I referred to us as dancers in the card deck that I helped you create. Anwa is a being's dance. And this has been true in most of my communications with the she and my experiences with them, which are probably nowhere near as extensive as that of many of the other presenters here in this forum, in this Congress. But nevertheless, what I have experienced is the musicality of the she. Not that they're always singing and playing instruments and that, not that kind of musicality, but that they are deeply sensitive to and immersed in the music of creation, the song of the spheres, if you wish. Mariel said that Anwa was key to understanding how the she shapeshift. And so let me reflect on that for a moment. When I think of shapeshifting, or certainly when I used to think about it before I had these conversations with Mariel and other she collaborators, I thought of it in very physical terms. The shaman who is one moment is a human being and the next moment is a wolf or an owl or a bear, that the physical form changes. And as I say, there are many legends about this, about humans or were humans that have had this capacity to change between being a human and something else. And of course, it's fantasy authors have picked up on this, and it's become a trope in many fantasy stories. The individual who turns into a tree or a plant or a bush, and then back again, or becomes a bird or an animal. It's an exciting and powerful concept. And it touches something very deep within us, I feel, which is the sense of connectedness and oneness with the world around us. In a way, shape-shifting, if we take it out of a purely literal and physical understanding or context, it's really saying that we have the ability to step out of our human perspective, our whatever is limited and constraining about our human nature, and enter the world as the citizen of a much larger community of life. We can be back in touch with that part of us that revels in being an animal. We can get in touch with that part of us that eons ago lived as a plant. In fact, this is a very interesting concept in itself. One of the things that both the she and my subtle colleagues have on occasion discussed is the ancient history, the esoteric history of humanity, in which we have not always had this primate form. And I don't mean that I don't mean this in the way that evolutionary biologists discuss it, that, we were single-celled organisms and we evolved into multicellular organisms and into plants and then into animals and so on. But this is something else. This is anthropologists and paleontologists now know that there were many different variations of the human species. Beings of great height and who were like giants in the land, and very small beings who were like hobbits in the land. That humanity has had a variety of forms over the millennia, over the hundreds of thousands of years. But what my inner colleagues and what the she have said is that there were forms of human beings that were more plant-like than animal, and what came to my mind was Groot from the sci-fi movie Guardians of the Galaxy. And there were forms of humanity that were more animal-like than they were primate. How do I want to say that? They were not anthropoidal, but represented another line of development. Because there was a great deal of experimentation that was going on within the inner realms in relationship to the then plasticity of the outer world, to try out, sometimes seriously, sometimes whimsically, different ways in which the basic soul impulse of humanity could be manifested in this world. And I think part of us, there is a deep memory that our souls have, a deep memory in the collective field of humanity about this ancient history in which we wore shapes other than those we have now. But also a sense of, if I had a different shape, I would be welcomed into a different community of life. If I looked like a bear, I would be welcomed into the earth sign community. If I looked like a wolf, I'd be welcomed into the wolf pack, and so on. And in a way, the idea of shape-shifting speaks to our both a longing and a need to reconnect with the wholeness of life in this world, to retain our humanity, but to expand it, and to step back into a deeper sense of commonality and oneness with the world around us, with the life around us. Anyway, the idea of shape-shifting carries a glamour and a resonance and a certain frisson of excitement to it. When I was a boy, I used to imagine being different sizes. And I would think, I would love to be like a mouse. And I could run under the sofa and explore the small nooks and crannies of the house in which I grew up. There was something exciting about being tiny and seeing the world from that small perspective. This past Christmas, my son-in-law was given a little car that's operated by remote control, but it's what's called a mixed reality toy, an augmented reality, because he operates it from a screen that allows him to see what the car sees. So on one level, he can look at the car as he directs it, driving it around the floor. But when he looks at his screen, he's in the car and he's looking out through its perspective, which is very small. It's like he becomes the mouse and he drives this car under the chair and under the sofa. And he sent me the video of what he was doing. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's my childhood dream. That's what I used to imagine doing. So my point here really is that the idea of shape-shifting touches something in us that goes beyond shape and form and enters into the realm of a deep longing to be part of the world in expanded and unconditional ways, to be part of the community of life that we sense is around us, and part of just the physical community of life, the great ecology of life that we know is around us. So I think somewhere in the imagination of many, if not all of us, especially those of us who come to fairy congresses, is this sense of how wonderful it would be to be able to flow into a different shape and experience and explore the world from a new perspective. And of course, we can do that. We can do it imaginatively. This is the great power of the human being, that we have this ability to imagine ourselves in different ways. We shape-shift through our imagination. Anyway, I was talking with Mariel about this shape-shifting, and that's what brought up the idea of Anwa. Because Anwa was critical, it was central to this idea of shape-shifting for her and for the she whom she knew. And so I'd like to read what further she had to say about it. I apologize for reading things. I don't normally do that in a talk. But when I have Mariel's words here, I might as well go directly to a she source and let you hear what she had to say rather than my trying to paraphrase it. You, David, might call this ability to shapeshift attunement. And it is this, but it is more. In fact, the word shape is misleading here. For this ability is not simply one of mimicking a form different from our own. The true shape of anything isn't what it looks like, but what it is as an activity of life. That is, it is its Anwa. The true shape of anything is what the she call its Anwa. If we see a tree, we are aware of the spirit of the tree and also of its form. We are aware of the shape of the tree spirit's intent and the activity and functions that flow from that intent. When we shapeshift, we use our Anwa to enter into and hold within ourselves the Anwa of the tree. We become this Anwa. We do not become the spirit or the identity of the tree, nor necessarily its form. Rather, we take on in ourselves, in our own energy field, the movement and flow of the tree's life. We fill ourselves with the activity of tree. In a way, as I understand what Mariel is saying, to become something, to become anything, you take on the motion of being that defined what that something is in relationship to the environment, the world in which it is functioning. You don't so much shift into a new shape as you shift into a new pattern of relationships and commitments and responsibilities that are part of the larger context and domain of that shape, in which that shape exists. You take on its Anwa, its motion of life, its activity of life. It might be possible, under the right circumstances, for us to assume the form of the tree, so that if you were looking, it would seem to you that you saw two trees, not one. But this accomplishes nothing. The form of the tree is not its life, not its Anwa. We are no closer to the tree if we take on its form than if we take on any form, including our own. Do you understand? For us, shape-shifting is not about form, but about connection. It is how we connect. I am taking on something of your Anwa now in order to communicate with you, and you are taking on something of mine. So we are shape-shifting now, are we not? And this goes back to what I was saying in the beginning about how I communicate with the she and with subtle beings. It really is a blending of beingness and presence, and yes, to say that they take on my shape and I take on their shape, not far from the truth. I mentioned my first mentor, John, and John was a subtle being, a non-physical individual, and we were together in a partnership, in a collaboration for almost 30 years. And the first 5 years of that were a period of training for me. And I write about this in my book, Apprentice to Spirit. When John would communicate, he could use words. He had been a human being. Language was familiar to him. It's not always familiar to some subtle beings. And yet the main form of our communication was this blending. Well, one of the exercises that John had me do, or I should say one of the part of the training, was that John would bring into my awareness, into my presence, into contact with my energy field, some subtle being. He could be a nature spirit, it could be a deva, it could be an angel, it could be another non-physical human, it could just be an energy, it could be a force like peace or a quality, But whatever it was, whatever he brought in the context of that lesson, he would then ask me, when you feel this presence of whatever or whoever it was, what is your shape? What shape did you take on? How did your shape change as you engage this presence? And he wasn't talking about my physical shape. He was talking about my energetic shape, how my energy field configured itself. Almost like two single-celled organisms coming together and their protoplasm flowing around each other and configuring to each other's unique structure. So he would say, what is your shape? So I would attune. I would pay attention to what I felt like, to what I could sense my energy field was doing. And, it might expand, it might contract, it might go long, it might go tiny. Often it just took on a different texture. It's a little hard to put these things into words, for which I apologize. I've been trying to put them into words for over 50 years, and I'm still working at it. But John really introduced me to this idea of shape as something fluid and energetic that we hold, a pattern that we hold. And sometimes we hold it very tightly and we reinforce it with our habits and with our belief systems, and we reinforce it psychologically and emotionally, mentally. And we can become a bit rigid, unable to flow into new experiences, unable for our shape to change when circumstances may require it. But he got me thinking in those early years about myself as something plastic, really, fluid. My energy field is not a thing, but as a flowing activity. And really as my whole life, just like your whole life, not as a thing, but as a flowing activity. And that flowing activity, I think, comes the closest to being what Mariel means by Anwa. So in a way, what John was asking me was, David, how does your Anwa change when I bring this phenomenon into your presence? How do you change? When I have difficulty attuning to a subtle being, and certainly when I had difficulty initially attuning to Mariel, it was because my energy field didn't know how to blend with her. I didn't know how to shape change. What did it mean to become a she, as it were? That was something I had to learn. And it taught me, really, about the way in each of us contained within ourselves, from our ancient selves, from our heritage, a she-like element. Just as Mariel and her other she colleagues contain within themselves something that is recognizably human. Let me go back to what she was saying about shape-shifting. So she said shape-shifting is not about form, but about communication. We blend with the Anwa of the things in the world around us in order to better know them and relate to them. You might say we attune, but attunement for humans often has too mental a connotation. Rather, it is that our Anwa, our activity, our way of connecting to the world, comes into harmony and blending with the Anwa of another. And this is more than a mental act, or even an imaginative one. It is an act of loving and honor. It is an act of shared life. Love stands behind our shape-shifting. Fast forward a number of years. This material that I've been reading, which some of which is found in my book, Conversations with the She, and in my second book, Engaging the She. This was out of a conversation that took place a number of years ago, 3-4 years or so. But this past year, when Michael and Lindsay asked if I would take part in the Fairy Congress, and I was thinking what I wanted to share, what could I share? I came back to this idea of shape-shifting. And then I had an interesting communication from Mariel. And she said, what we do is not so much shape-shifting as it is shape-sharing. When we shape-share, we blend with the Anwa of things in the world around us in order to better know and relate to them. Our Anwa comes into harmony and blending with the Anwa of another. Essentially, we share Anwa. It is an act of loving and respect and honor that enables us to reflect and participate in each other's beingness. Anwa is at the heart of shape-sharing. This was very exciting. I love this idea of shape-sharing because it really makes more sense to me than shape-shifting. I may have no idea at all how to shift my shape. There are certainly days when I look in the mirror and I think, wow, I'd really like to shift this shape. But I do know, we all know, how to shape-share. We know how to extend ourselves to each other so that through love, through empathy, through attunement, through being open, through respect, we learn how to, as the saying goes, walk in another's shoes. How to share their life. Or really how to become aware that we are all sharing an activity of life, an activity of living that is common to all beings. Shakespeare had his character, Shylock, the Jew, say, "If you cut me, do I not bleed?" He was pointing out that underneath all the cultural difference, racial difference, economic difference, political difference, all the shape differences, there is this commonality that we all share. There is one life in which we all participate. It's not a mystical thing. Just about everything that lives on this planet is carbon-based. We share a similar DNA structure, similar biochemistry. There are exceptions, but for the most part, this is so. The idea of shape-sharing, particularly through coming into alignment and into resonance with the Anwa of another, with the soul activity, with the life activity, and the capabilities of another, how that person connects with life and shapes life and changes life and is changed by life. Coming into connection with the Anwa of another, we don't lose anything in ourselves, but we expand, because now we are entering into a different perspective, a different point of view, a different way of being in the world. Right at this moment, here in the United States, we're still contesting the nature of who we are as a country. Today, as I speak to you, an election is going on in the state of Georgia, and it will determine who controls the Senate. And tomorrow, when Joe Biden's electoral victory is confirmed in the Senate and he becomes unequivocally the new president, the president-elect, there are those who are going to challenge this and say, no, we want a different America, we want a different outcome, we want different facts. So here in this country where I live, and really in many ways around the world, we are so heightened in our awareness of difference, of our differences, of what separates us, of what causes division and conflict between us. So the idea of attuning to each other's Anwa, attuning to the way in which we seek to unfold in the world, and to understand and to allow this to bring understanding of each other. This is very important. We're threatened by fragmentation through social media into all these little islands of belief and perspective and all the alternate facts that people hold. But we're still one humanity. And more than that, we're one life form in a world that is physical and non-physical, that contains she and fairy and devas and angels and subtle beings of all kinds, as well as our fellow humans. And if anything is needed, it is an ability to shapeshare, to understand what is trying to emerge in another's uniqueness, and to do so through respect and honor, and most essentially through love. One thing that I'm not sure about is whether Anwa is something that I, as a human being, an incarnate human being, can fully perceive. I think it is. I feel that it is, but I'm not sure that I perceive it in the same way that, say, Mariel does, hard as she may try to explain it to me. But we have our human equivalent. And just like for the she, our equivalent, whatever we call it, Anwa or something else, is based on love. It really all does come down to that. And for me, the idea of shape-sharing as contrasted with shape-shifting emphasizes this central concept of love. How can I share my energetic shape, my psychological shape, my emotional shape, my life shape with you, except through love? Except in a way that honors your life shape as well. And I don't seek to dominate or change it. You don't seek to dominate or change me, but we seek to understand how we can partner together, how we can blend, how we can join each other's songs into a larger choir that then has the capacity to sing new songs that a single voice could not manage. We can create harmonies together. This is what the she do. They are beings of harmony for the most part. And Anwa is for them a way of recognizing the melody of another so that they can blend with it and create new harmonies. What is our equivalent of that? It's important we not get caught up in jargon. Anwa, it's just a word. It was a word that Mariel gave to me, but it's like any word from any foreign language. What is important is what I understand as its meaning, and the potential within that meaning. And that is a potential of tapping my ever-present human capacity to love, to listen, and to share with another. The world needs our shape-sharing. It doesn't really need us to be shape-shifters. I think that's all I wish to say. And I want to thank you for listening. And I hope this session has been helpful and has given you some new ideas, and that it's been at least pleasant for you to listen to. Thank you for coming into my home and sharing this space with me. Thank you for sharing Anwa. And with that, I'm going to close the she portal. I want to give thanks to you who have been listening, to you who made the choice to take part in this wonderful Fairy Congress. And I very much want to thank my she colleagues and the she race and she realm as a whole. They are our cousins. And we are part of a great and ancient lineage, one of light and blessing for the world. May their Anwa and ours truly sing together to create new harmonies for our planet. So I end our session by closing the portal. Thank you very much. I'm David Spangler, and I give you my blessing, and I welcome yours. And thank you for sharing with me this time and this wonderful field of energy of our Fairy Congress. May you enjoy and benefit from and contribute to everything it has to offer. And may that result in the days ahead in all of us going forth as blessings to the Anwa of our world. Thank you.
Hello, folks. Welcome back from that, and thank you, David. So,
Is that him?
Is what? David is standing by here. We'll be getting him on shortly. Are people hearing me? And here's David. Raise your hand if okay, great. So, David, say to make sure your sound's good.
Okay, can you hear me, Michael?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, wonderful. Well, let's see here. There's I did keep track of some questions here. We don't have a whole lot left, so I'm just going to try to keep it moving along here, and I'm going to see if I could actually, I don't know how to scroll, unfortunately, on this chat thing here. So I'm just going to paraphrase. I have like 7 questions that I noted that I thought were interesting too, and there's more. So I'm just going to give a couple questions here, and then from that, then we'll open it up for a few more from the floor. So someone said, John says, is there any, you might say, if you're sharing Anwa with another being, when you disconnect, is there any danger of losing some of your own Anwa or your own, in other words, she's asking, is there anything to be watchful of? So comments on, because you mentioned that sharing Anwa is, it's a good thing. We're trying to shape share. Is there anything to worry about?
As I understand it, no, there isn't. It's not exactly the same as sharing subtle energies that might become sticky and be transferred from one person to another. You're really sharing. It's more like coming into rhythm with somebody. Like if you came onto the dance floor and a person was dancing a certain way and you synchronized with their movements, you can then stop the dance and move off the dance floor, and you're not still caught up in that movement. So as I understand it from what Mariel has shown me, that is not a danger. But it's a wonderful question.
And the question from Colleen is that, is it that you should know your own Anwa, in a sense, very good before you try to connect with the Anwa of another? So how does one, is that just sort of inherent in us? Or is there something we can do to enhance our own understanding of our own Anwa?
That's such a good question. And as I mentioned in the talk, this is something that I'm still learning about, really. So right from the beginning, there was a question for me of how exactly do I, as a human being or any human being, experience Anwa? Because my impression from what Mariel has said and what she showed me was that this is something that they perceive. It's not like seeing an aura, but it's like, but more like feeling a vibration, feeling, like I said, feeling a rhythm. It's hard for me to find the right words to put to it. So if I'm looking for my human equivalent, then I think what I'm looking at is, what is the felt sense? What is the full body holistic sense of how I engage energetically with life? What is my what is the the shape or the space that I occupy or create in my engagement with life. And it's a subtle thing because for us, it would have a psychological feel to it. It would have an emotional feel. It would have a physical feel. I'm not sure that that is at all true for Mariel, for the she, who seemed to perceive it differently, kind of like we would perceive a vibration in our bones, a vibration in our body. So I would want to take time to go into silence, to go into meditation, and be self-reflective, and not try to get caught up in concepts about myself or in jargon and about myself, but to get a feel of how I occupy life. What is the sense of the energy that I carry around me? Is it joyous? Is it open? Is it closed? Is it stressful? Is it, so that's actually the best I can offer for that. It's an ongoing process of exploration, and it's one that I'm still exploring. And I wish I could be more concrete, but I'm still learning to understand it.
I guess we'll never stop learning then. So
certainly not in my case.
Here's a question from early on. From what this person says, she are very joyful. Is one story we hear, but also something of Dr. Spock, and that seems to be a contradiction to me. So I don't quite know where that's coming from, but.
I'm sorry, Michael. I didn't quite get that. Could you repeat?
What's it that the she are thought to be very joyful? That's one thing we get, and then they also had the impression they've heard that they were like Dr. Spock, and they were like, that's a contradiction.
Oh, I see. Oh.
Yeah.
In my experience, and there are others here, I'm sure, in the Fairy Congress who have more experience here than I do. But in my experience, Mariel and the ones who associate with her that I've encountered, they carry joy with them as something that's innate in them. But at the same time, they're, how should I say that? They're composed. I would not say that she's aloof. She's not unemotional in the way that Mr. Spock is. But she definitely does not convey a sense of emotion in the way that a human would. So I can see why somebody might experience the she as being Spock-like or aloof, because they're not as demonstrative in what we would recognize as an emotional way. But they nevertheless carry very powerful energies or vibratory qualities that are joyful. One of the things that I've experienced with Mariel and with other she is that they are masters of forming connection. They have a deep, penetrating insight into how all the various elements of the world and of life are interconnected. And they flow with that. They work with that. And out of that comes a profound sense of joy. It's not so much that they have joy as an individual. It's not like I'm feeling happy, but it's more like they're embodying the joy of the world's joy at being itself.
Mm-hmm. One last question before I open it up here. I'll have to find out if we can go late or not.
Sure.
Is someone said, is animal communication, a lot of people communicate with animals now, that it's like sharing Anwa with the animal. What would you say about Anwa and animal communication?
That's a wonderful thought. And I would not at all be surprised if people who are animal communicators are not, in fact, sharing Anwa, shape sharing, as it were, with with the animals. The challenge here is that there are a number of different subtle fields that exist between us and other forms of life. And some of them we pick up on telepathically and mentally, and others we don't. We have to feel them deeply within our body. And you could say that we feel them in our heart. Some people are more aligned with certain of these fields and modes of connection than others are. And so they would use that particular modality. So somebody might be telepathic, for example, and their communication with animals is more telepathic in nature, and for somebody else it might be quite different. So this makes it hard to make a general statement to say, well, all animal communication is through Anwa or through telepathy or through empathetic resonance or soul resonance, or however you want to describe it. But I do feel that that animals have just a deeper connection to what Anwa represents, to the energy of being alive, and that we as civilized human beings have lost a lot of that. It's still there for us, but it's overlaid with a lot of mental and emotional concepts and constructs that make it harder to attune to it. But I could definitely see where sharing Anwa is a mode for animal communication. That would not surprise me.
Thank you, David. Now, there's still quite a few people in the meeting here, 53. Would somebody with a burning question like to unmute themselves and keep your questions short, please, or I'll find out if we can go late here shortly. Go ahead, somebody.
I'd love to ask a question. If
go for it.
Sensing into my energetic.
You're still, at the moment your voice isn't coming through. Brendan, can you fix that?
I can hear him.
I can hear him.
Let me.
Thank you.
Oh. Okay.
My question is how can we work on changing or expanding our energetic field? Like I definitely feel often fearful and guarded, and I'd really love to be able to change that.
Yeah, that's Kevin. That's such a wonderful question, and given the nature of what's happening in our world today, there's so much jagged energy in the collective that being guarded actually is not always a bad idea. I can understand why a person would naturally feel that way. There are certainly times when I do as well. I think the thing is, there's a saying in the military that the best defense is a good offense. And I have found over the years when I'm feeling under assault or feeling the pressure of these jagged energies in the environment, that if I can put love or positive energy out, that pushes it away. It basically establishes a connective and supportive field around myself. And one of the exercises that I use for that is very, very simple. I call it the touch of love. It's essentially just taking your hands and taking a moment to access a felt sense of love within yourself, whatever that comes from. It could come from a memory, it could come from your meditations, it could come from a spiritual practice, but whatever engenders a sense of love within your within your heart, within your being, then when I do that, I imagine this love flowing down through my arms and into my fingers, and then I just touch something. It doesn't matter what I touch. It could be the table, it could be the chair, it could be anything. But I'm putting my attention on allowing love to really to pool in my fingers and be accessible to that which I am touching. Now, I'm not trying to force or push that love into something, but I'm making it available. And because for me, everything is alive, and I want to respect the autonomy, the wishes of that which I'm touching. I mean, it might not want an outpouring of love right at that moment. So the touch of love brings that love out of my heart or out of whatever inner center I am tapping, and makes it available in my fingers. And then I'm just touching something and essentially saying, I'm bringing love to you. This love is there as an energy, as a quality. You can absorb it. You can take it in. We can have this as a flow of relationship between us. And if you don't want it right now, that's fine. And I can move and touch something else. But I find that, just getting that flow of something moving out from me, rather than, constricting myself to protect myself from something trying to get in, that shifts the balance. And then I can feel more open. And I think there are definitely situations where I want to be wise and careful, and where I may need to feel guarded. But I don't want to live in a guarded state. And so therefore I find exercises like the touch of love, or anything that opens my heart out to what's in my immediate environment, is very helpful. And actually, let me stress that this exercise focuses on the immediate environment. I don't try to, love the world or love humanity or think of peace for everybody. Those are too abstract. The scale is too large. And I want to begin with something that's immediate and that's tangible, where I can feel my energy field making an actual practical and discernible contact. And then once that flow gets going, I can always ask that it be expanded and directed out into a larger arena, out into the world or out into humanity. But I never try to start there, because I want to start with what's immediate and accessible to me as a specific person. Well, so I hope that's helpful.
Well, thank you, David. I think that's helpful for all of us. That's a great lesson there. Thank you, Kevin. So now, next question. Is somebody else ready?
Somebody put a question in chat if you want to read it. Okay.
See if for some reason, I don't know how to scroll my chat. So you want to read it?
I have a question. When they have spoken to me and in surprise I didn't speak or acknowledge their presence, do they leave? Are they here only occasionally? Can they hear me speaking to them all the time? That's from Barry Economy.
I apologize. I heard someone asking a question, but I'm afraid I couldn't make it out.
David, do you have access to the chat column in your?
Can you hear me now?
Look, let me see.
If David could read it, that'd be good. Let's see if he gets there. Or if Fair Economy could read it.
Can you hear me speaking?
Yes, I can hear you. I don't. Wait a minute. Chat. Okay.
Aloha.
All right.
Fair Economy is my computer,
so
but I'm
I have access to my chat. Which is the question here? That
my question is, when I have been
Is this the one
spoken
about
to.
not speaking or acknowledging their presence?
Yes. Once a ball of light flowed past, a sphere of light flowed past my husband and I didn't speak to it. Another time when I was in the kitchen and doing something, I heard fairies don't mind beetles. And what I was doing was making sure a certain area couldn't have bugs get in it. And another time when I had dropped my glasses and couldn't reach them easily, I decided that the fairies, which I guess I'm trying to shorten the story and get to it more quickly, that I felt that the fairy presence had been playing with me and moved my glasses beyond my reach. I went about tasks, came back to get the glasses, and had been singing the whole time to myself, "Teach me to see in a new way." And so when I was addressed, I wasn't really thinking that someone was going to speak to me in any of those occasions. When I was caulking the kitchen floor, I didn't think I was going to hear someone say, "Fairies don't mind beetles." But I was thinking, cockroaches couldn't hide under this counter now that I'm caulking it. And when I was reaching for my glasses, singing, "Teach me to see in a new way," I wasn't expecting to hear someone say, but I had been singing for about 20 minutes. "When you finally learn to see us, your eyes will be of no use." And when the ball of light, which was the earlier thing, floated down our hallway, I was so struck I didn't say anything to it. So my question is, when I didn't engage in conversation or acknowledge that I was being visited, what happens? Do they leave? Is that something that can be picked up again? Because these occasions, which I haven't realized I was going to have, then they pass. And then I would love to have them more. Where are they? How? All of that. Can you speak to that? Where do they go? Where are they? Am I offending them by not speaking? Basically.
Yay!
Well, I doubt on the whole that you would be offending them. I can't say 100% that that's true because, you might have a curmudgeonly fairy, I suppose. But this would be true with any subtle being, or any being who's occupying a dimension that we don't perceive normally with our five senses. They recognize, or many of them recognize, our limitations, and they can easily try to communicate with us. And if they're not successful, and we don't acknowledge them, there will come a point where they'll withdraw and just say, "Well, I'll try again later." But I hesitate to make a general statement here because so much depends on the particular relationship that you have formed, or the environment that you've created. If you've created an environment in your home, say, that's very open to and compatible to these beings, then they can be present and come and enjoy the fruits of that environment and the energy that you've created, and they will try to express their gratitude or their acknowledgement in other ways. To the extent of their ability, they will look for ways of letting you know. But then it's up to us to be attentive and alert as well. It's in many cases, many of these beings simply ignore us, partly because they're aware that we're ignoring them. And I remember once I was in a doctor's office, and the doctor was running late, as par for the course for any of us that go to doctor's offices. And I was sitting there waiting, and I thought, well, while I'm sitting here, I'm going to do this touch of love exercise that I described, and I'm going to just make available what love and what blessing I can for the environment of the waiting room. And again, I'm not trying to make something happen. I'm not trying to push it on anyone or on the environment, but I'm making myself available to it. And so I'm sitting there just making this positive energy available. And suddenly there was this small being about, 2.5 feet high that appeared next to me, standing next to me. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm wanting to bless the room." And he said, "Well, humans don't do that. Why are you doing it? Humans don't bless rooms." and he was very surprised. I realized he was in a certain state of shock. But as soon as he realized that there was a connection, that in fact this was what I was doing and I could acknowledge him, then he became very open and receptive. So I think in many cases, I feel from time to time, I feel a contact. It doesn't resolve into something specific, not like hearing a voice or getting a message or anything like that, but I'm aware of a presence, or I feel that someone has entered the room. And so my standard response is just to say welcome, or to say I acknowledge that you're here, and blessings to you if you're passing through or if you're here. And I find if I make that acknowledgement, then it can open the door for something to unfold. If they want to make a contact, and often they may not. So I don't think you have to be afraid that if you don't immediately respond, they're going to be offended and they're not going to come back again. That I think would be a very rare occurrence.
Thank you, David. Here's a question. It's said that in our genetics, human genetics, that some of us have Neanderthal blood within us. That that there's still some genetics in the Neanderthals. I've heard it said that some humans have fairy blood in them, or she blood from the past, that were closely related, and that there's still, you might say that there's still the Irish talk about having fairy lovers. Is there? Do you have any thoughts on is there she blood within some humans?
As I understand it, yes, there is that the she and humans can in fact mate and have offspring. If this was more common in the past, I have no idea how common it is now, if at all. But there's no fundamental reason why it could not take place, as far as I understand it. And yes, there are people who carry fairy or she lineage, and there's probably even more people who wish that they did or imagine that they do. but it's certainly possible.
Great. Another question for the group here. We'll probably need to let David go here in a bit, but it's nice he's staying on for us.
I have a question.
Do you mean which question do you want?
This is Niev. Can I just ask the question? I didn't put it in the box.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
So thank you, David. This has been an amazing presentation, and I'm really grateful. It's given me, I am an animal communicator, and when you were speaking, it gave me so much like, oh, right, because for me, it is that Anwa. So what I'm just trying, I think this is what, and I see how you have been working with Mariel and how you keep the conversation open with curiosity, and how you're trying to keep formulating, which is beautiful, because I often have experienced that myself. But with Professor Tweedy, well, I forget if that's what you call them, Professor John.
John, yes.
Yeah.
Just John.
John, sorry. So, is it when he first came to you, he came in that form because I think you said that's what you were able to relate with, and as you experienced him, it was like he was working with your own body instrument to help tune you to be able to go to the net for your body and your consciousness to see him in a different form. Is that accurate?
And basically, that is correct. Yes.
Okay, my question is, so then just being really open, what I liked about it is that how you said Mariel comes sometimes and then she doesn't. And that when she does, do you often notice it's like she's coming because she sees there's an opportunity that you might be engaging with something that she might relate with, or is she coming with like, oh, here, like how you said with the cards, did she come with that for you?
She came with the idea of the cards. Yes, that really originated with her. When Mariel, when she makes contact with me, most of the time it's for a reason. And it's not, well, I'll drop in for tea and we'll hang out together for a bit. It takes some effort for her to make the contact. And so there's generally a purpose behind it. Here's one interesting story, actually. So as I said, when Mariel first came, it was hard for me to accommodate and connect to her energy. It took a while. And then I found it wasn't like she was coming every day. Well, once we had the card deck pattern established, then it wasn't like she was coming every day. It would be periodic contact while we were developing the card deck. And then the intervals between contact became longer. But as I became more accustomed to her energy, I found that I was thinking of her more and more as a human being, and seeing her as a human woman. And one day she came to me and she said, "David, I'd like you to stop thinking of me that way because you're making me too human, and that's getting in the way of our ability to communicate." Because there's a wildness about her and the other she that I've encountered. Many years ago, I met a woman who had a dog that was almost a wolf. It wasn't a pure wolf, but it was like 60-70% wolf. And this animal had the most amazing energy around it. It had this intelligence. When you looked in its eyes, that you just knew you were looking at this very intelligent being. But it was an intelligence that went back into the wilderness. I'm not just sure how to say that, but it was not domesticated. I mean, it was a friendly enough animal. I didn't feel any threat around it, but around her. But nevertheless, you had the sense this was a creature that was not domesticated in the way that, say, other dogs are. Well, that's the feeling I have with Mariel. She's not domesticated. She's not human, and she's connected to humanity. She's part of the larger field of humanity, but there's an element of the wild with her that when I was in my imagination just sort of turning her into a human woman, she said, "No, you're creating a thought form that will just get in the way. So it's interesting. It's interesting learning to try to be open to the reality of these beings, even when at times they take on an appearance that is intended to facilitate communication, like John did with his Tweety professor uniform, as it were. But if John and I were to have a genuinely co-creative partnership, he had to be who he was. He couldn't be this fictitious image. And it's exactly the same with Mariel.
So, David, there's, of course, a lot of fairy lore and legend about the she, and a lot of it isn't very flattering. And I hear you probably know the terms the Seelie court and unseelie court. And there's sort of the idea that there are, you might say, some she that are more spiritually advanced and other ones that aren't, and that there's duality there. There's light and dark, that they have free will, and that all, you can't treat the she as a uniform block. They're all the same. Would you say anything about, the idea of the differences among the she? You must have some of that. So,
again, I want to emphasize that I don't think of myself as an expert on the she, but from what Mariel has said, there are she who are actively or passively hostile. They're not friendly to humans for historical reasons, and maybe a better word would be they're antithetical. They're apathetical. They don't really care about connecting to humans, and they'd rather that the distance between us be maintained. And in some cases, for many of the she, it appears, as I understand it, that they have simply withdrawn. They don't have any bad feelings, but they just feel that there's nothing common. There's no commonality. There's no point of connection between their race and ours. But they're open to seeing what's possible. Now, Mariel, without question, represents a faction, a group within the she that is dedicated to developing and furthering contact between incarnate humanity and she humanity. And I've gathered from her the sense that that many she are just observing this, and she, part of a movement that's global in nature, of she who are saying, we can't allow the differences between our two aspects of humanity to remain, because the fate of the world is in such a dire place, and what will help, maybe the only thing that will help, is to be able to work together and to work out of a place of wholeness, of partnership between human beings and the fairy worlds and other Gaian dimensions and communities such as the devas and nature spirits. That unless we can work as partners, we're in for a very rough time. And this is as important to the she as it is to us, even though they may not be impinged by some of the physical repercussions that we will experience because of climate change and other things. But they do not go unscathed. Their world is intimately connected to our own. So there is this interest, and there is this motivation to to say, let's develop the pathways of partnership. And something like what you're doing, Michael, with the Fairy Congress all these years, this has been a very important element of this. And in the way Mariel's group of the ones that I've been working with, they're very much along the same line of harmony and cooperation and partnership that you've been working on all these years, and others like Lindsay and so on here with the Fairy Congress. But this isn't to say that they represent all the she. And there may be she, I don't know. I have not experienced them. I have no information about them. I think some of the stories of the Unseelie court are human projections. In fact, I'm almost convinced that many of those stories are human projections because we're projecting onto their world the same kind of motivations and differences that we have in our world. And they're not like us. They are not human beings in the same way that we are, and they don't have the same emotional structure that we have in that way. But this is not to say that they don't have their differences of opinion, and there may in fact be she who are antithetical to humanity. But I just have never encountered them, and Mariel has had very little to say about them. And on the whole, what she has emphasized over and over is the need for she-human partnership and the many dimensions of the she realm that are working to foster that partnership.
So thank you, David. That was